His own artillery is 48 minutes out. Corporal Leo Beac lies flat in a drainage cut on the southern face of Hill 624, in the Apennine Mountains north of Florence, and the limestone under his cheek is vibrating. Not from shell fire, from boots. Men are moving inside the hill above him, along a covered trench cut into the rock, and he can feel the rhythm of them through the stone the way he used to feel a cutting machine working 200 feet down and a quarter-mile away. 12 minutes ago, there were 11 men in his squad. Now there is one. Above him, at 624 meters, sits a position that the S2 section of the 338th Infantry has already written up twice and both times underestimated. 9 mutually supporting emplacements. 2 of them taut concrete, poured and cured, with firing embrasures 11 inches high, too low to grenade, too thick to breach with anything a rifle company carries up a mountain. 3 MG-42s on interlocking arcs, each one throwing 1,200 rounds a minute, each one sighted so that a man crossing the open terraces is inside 2 cones of fire at all times and inside 3 for 11 meters of it. A Nebelwerfer battery ranged onto the approach in advance and pre-plotted. Wire, shoe mines, and behind all of it, a Fallschirmjäger company that had held ground at Cassino and had not, in 4 years of war, ever been pushed off a hill it intended to keep. They were not frightened men in holes. They were the best defensive infantry in Europe, and they were rested, and they were waiting. The smell in the drainage cut is cordite and crushed thyme, and the copper taste at the back of his throat that comes from breathing your own blood down from a nose broken by a rock splinter. His M1 Garand is across his forearms with the operating rod out of the mud. 6 clips left. 4 grenades. 2 ribs on his left side moving in a way ribs are not supposed to move. 48 minutes from now, a battalion of 105 howitzers will put a time-on-target concentration onto this hill and erase every living thing on it, including the 4 people hiding in the cistern chamber beneath the German command bunker, who nobody at battalion knows are there, including him. He has 48 minutes to take a position that has killed 206 Americans in 9 days. Alone. And the thing that will let him do it is not courage, and it is not the rifle. It is something he learned 900 feet under Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania, when he was 17 years old, and it is the reason that in 6 weeks, German prisoners in a cage outside Livorno will be arguing with an American interrogator about whether the man who took Hill 624 was a man at all. Leo Beac was born in Shenandoah, Pennsylvania, in 1919, in a row house on Cole Street that shared a wall with his uncle's row house and a chimney with both. His father cut anthracite for the Philadelphia and Reading Coal and Iron Company. His grandfather had cut anthracite for the same company under a different name. Leo went underground at 17 in the spring of 1936 and spent 5 years in the Mahanoy district as a laborer, and then as a miner's helper on a long wall face, and what he learned down there was not how to swing a pick. Anybody can swing a pick. What he learned was how to listen to rock. An anthracite seam talks. It talks before it drops. The timberman taught him to stand still with his palm against a prop and read the working of the roof through his hand, the tick and settle of a good roof, the long dry groan of a bad one. He learned to tell how far away another crew was working by the interval of their machine coming up through the floor. He learned that water always tells you where the ground is hollow, because water finds every void a mountain has and runs through it. And if you follow the water long enough, you will end up somewhere nobody built a door. He was not a large man, 5'7", 152 pounds at induction. He had a flattened nose from a fall of rock in 1938 and a permanent gray line under the skin of his left forearm where coal dust had healed into a cut. He enlisted in January 1943, not out of a recruiting poster. His brother Stanley had gone in the previous summer, and their mother had stopped eating dinner at the table. And Leo decided that if he was going to spend the war watching her not eat dinner, he would rather spend it somewhere else. In the 3rd Platoon of Company B, they called him Timber. It started as a joke about where he came from, and it stopped being a joke at Santa Maria Infante in May, when Beac put his hand flat against the wall of a farmhouse cellar, held it there for a slow 10 count, and told his squad leader to get everybody out of the north room. Nobody moved. He said it again. They moved. The 88 round came through the north wall 90 seconds later. After that, when Beac said the ground was wrong, men picked up their rifles. In the left breast pocket of his field jacket, folded into a square the size of a playing card and wrapped in oilcloth cut from a ration carton, he carried a letter from his mother dated the 2nd of August, 1944. It was 4 lines long. 3 of the lines were about his brother, who had been reported missing in the Vosges on the 19th of July and had not been reported anything since. The 4th line said, "Leo, one of you comes home." He had not written back. He had not been able to think of anything to put on the page that was not a lie. 6 weeks later, he was on his belly in a drainage cut on the side of an Italian mountain with his squad dead behind him, and a letter in his pocket that he had never answered, listening to boots move through solid rock. The order came down on the evening of the 13th of September, 1944. The Gothic line, Grün Linie on German maps, ran across the Italian peninsula through the highest ground the Apennines had to offer, and Fifth Army had been eating it a ridge at a time. The Il Giogo Pass sector was the hinge. Take the shoulders of the pass, and Highway 6524 opened toward Firenzuola and the Po Valley behind it. Fail, and the whole army spent the winter in the mountains. Hill 624 was a spur on the eastern shoulder. On the aerial mosaics it looked like nothing, a bare limestone hump with terraced olive groves on the western face and a farmhouse ruin on the crown. Company B's briefing gave them the following: 1 reinforced German platoon on the crown. Estimated 40 men. 2 machine gun positions, field expedient, no permanent works. Wire on the eastern approach only. Approach the western terraces under cover of dark, cross the open ground in the last hour before first light, take the crown by 700, consolidate. Every single one of those figures was wrong. What the S2 estimate did not contain, because the photographs were 9 days old and the reverse slope had never been imaged, was that Hill 624 was not a platoon outpost. It was the anchor of the sector's entire eastern fire plan, and it had been under construction by Organisation Tot Labor since the previous December. 2 Fallschirmjäger rifle companies had already been broken against it. On the 6th of September, a company of the 339th had gone up the western terraces in the dark exactly as Company B was now being told to do, and had lost 81 men in 19 minutes to guns nobody had known existed. 9 days. 206 American casualties. The position had never been penetrated, had never lost a single emplacement, and its commander, Hauptmann Anton Reith, 29 years old, Crete, Ortona, Cassino, had reported to regiment on the 11th that he could hold Hill 624 against battalion strength, indefinitely provided his ammunition allocation continued. Regiment had believed him. Regiment had been right, too. Company B crossed the line of departure at 4:30 on the 14th of September with 104 effectives. The plan shattered at 4:51. The first thing to go was the route. The western terraces, the safe approach, the covered approach, the one the whole scheme of maneuver rested on, had been sown with shoe mines during the night of the 12th by a Fallschirmjäger pioneer platoon that had come up the reverse slope with mules after dark. Wooden box mines. No metal. The detectors could not see them, and the moonlight could not either. Second platoon lost 14 men in the first 11 minutes without a shot being fired at them, and the sound those mines made going off in the dark, flat, close, almost polite, was the sound of the whole operation coming apart. The second thing to go was the estimate. When the first flare went up at 5:03 and the terraces turned white, the men lying in that olive grove counted muzzle flashes and understood in about 4 seconds that they were not looking at 2 machine guns. They were looking at 9 emplacements on a coordinated fire plan, engaging in a rehearsed sequence, from a hillside with 131 German paratroopers on it. They had been sent to take a position with 2.5 times their number waiting inside it. The third thing to go was the mission itself. At 5:47, with second platoon gone and the company pinned across 3 terraces, battalion came up on the SCR 300 and changed everything. The flanking attack on Monticelli had stalled. The sector was going to be reshelled. Company B was to break contact and withdraw to the line of departure, and a battalion time-on-target concentration would be placed on Hill 624 at 1600 hours. Captain Howard Leggett got that order out to his platoons in 4 minutes. It reached 3rd Platoon in fragments, through a handheld SCR 536 with a dying battery, and by the time it reached Beac he was already 300 meters forward of everyone else, inside the wire, in a drainage cut he had found by following water. He came up on the handheld once. Leggett's voice, flattened and hollowing out as the battery failed. Timber break contact. Come off that hill. That is a direct order, Corporal. Beac looked back down the slope he had just crossed. Between him and the line of departure lay 200 meters of shoe mines in the dark, 3 terraces enfiladed by an MG-42 he could see the barrel change smoke from, and the bodies of the men he had come up with. Kessler, Moon, Vital, Aguilar, Prosser. He did not answer the radio. He shut it off, which is not the same thing as not hearing it, and every man who has ever done it knows exactly what the difference is. By 600 the situation was this. His unit was gone, withdrawn or dead. His communications were off and he had made them off. He had 8 clips for the Garand, 64 rounds plus a partial bandolier, 4 fragmentation grenades and 2 white phosphorus, an M1911 with 2 magazines, a trench knife, and a canteen with roughly a third of a quart in it. He had a broken nose, a gash across the scalp above his right ear that had glued his hair into a mat, and he had not slept since the 12th. One American rifleman, one uncaptured position, 10 hours until his own artillery landed on it. The mission was still active because nobody had told the hill it wasn't. He moved at 6:18, up the drainage cut, on knees and elbows, at the speed of a man who has all day and knows he does not understand what he was moving into. Hauptmann Reith's defense of Hill 624 was not improvised, and it was not desperate. It was a textbook reverse slope-hand crest fire plan executed by professionals with time and concrete. 3 MG-42s in Tobruk emplacements on the crown, arcs interlocking at 30 and at 90 meters, each with a designated alternate position and a rehearsed displacement drill. Riflemen with Kar 98Ks in stone sangers along the eastern lip. 2 MP-40 assault sections held back on the reverse slope as a counter-penetration reserve. A Panzerschreck team sighting on the farm track in case armor ever came up it. Ammunition dumped forward in the covered trench so that no man had to leave cover to resupply. Water, rations, relief rotations every 4 hours so that nobody on the guns was tired, and the men themselves. Oberfeldwebel Kurt Reinecke, 41, platoon sergeant of the 2nd Platoon, had jumped into Crete in 1941 and had held a monastery wall at Cassino for 4 months against everything the Allies could stack against it. His men were not conscripts and they were not boys. They shaved. They cleaned weapons on a schedule. When the flares went up over the terraces, they did not shout, they called ranges. At 6:31, the crest gunners picked up movement in the drainage cut and did exactly the right thing. They did nothing dramatic. Reinecke put a single sniper onto it and traversed the number 2 gun 8 degrees left, and they waited, because they had learned at Cassino that Americans in a ditch will always eventually stand up. At 6:44, Beac reached the point where the drainage cut ran out into the open at the base of the 3rd terrace wall and stood up. The ambush was not the guns on the crown. 12 meters to his right, dug into the terrace wall itself and roofed with a section of olive trunk and 40 centimeters of packed earth, was a 4th machine gun position that had never been fired. Reith had emplaced it in July and had ordered it silent through both previous American assaults, held back, kept clean, kept secret for exactly one purpose. It covered the dead ground. It covered the one approach a clever man would find. It opened at 8 meters range. The first burst went past Beac's shoulder and took the top off the terrace wall beside his head and filled the air with limestone. He was standing in the open, at conversational distance, in the traverse of an MG-42 that had been waiting 3 months for him. He had somewhere between 3 and 5 seconds. He did not run. Running was what the gun was there for. Running took a man across the traverse, and the traverse was 180 degrees of nothing. What he did instead was drop backward off the terrace. He went over the edge he had just climbed and fell 9 feet onto the packed dirt of the lower terrace on his left side, and broke 2 ribs doing it and lived, because he had understood something about that emplacement in the half-second he had to understand anything. It was dug into the wall, which meant the wall was in front of it, which meant the gun could not depress past its own lip. There was a wedge of ground directly beneath it that the gunner could not touch, and Beac put himself in that wedge by falling into it. He lay in the dirt with his ribs grinding and the gun hammering the air 2 meters above him and his rifle still in his hands, because he had not let go of it, because you do not let go of it. Then he did something that made no tactical sense at all. He rolled onto his front, turned his head, and pressed his ear flat against the ground. And he stayed there under fire in the open at the base of a defended hill for 40 seconds, counting. 6:51. The silent gun. He came at it from underneath, along the base of the terrace wall, inside the dead wedge, and he did not use a grenade because a grenade would tell the Crown where he was. He used the entrenching tool. The roof of that emplacement was 40 centimeters of packed earth over olive trunk, and 40 centimeters of packed earth is nothing to a man who has moved a great deal more of it in the dark for a living. He cut a hole through the back corner of the roof in 90 seconds and dropped a white phosphorus grenade through it. 2 Fallschirmjäger came out of the rear crawlway. He shot both of them with the Garand at 4 meters. That was 3,705. The count that would not add up. Up on the Crown, Oberfeldwebel Reinecke was trying to build a picture and could not make the pieces fit. The silent gun was off the net. The crest observers reported the American on the western terraces. Then they reported him below the terraces. Then a runner from the eastern Sangers said there was firing behind the wire on the eastern side, which was impossible, because getting from the western terraces to the eastern wire meant crossing the Crown, and nothing had crossed the Crown. Reinecke asked the question that everyone on that hill would keep asking for the next 7 hours. Why Veal? How many are there? The report came back. 1. He did not accept it. No professional would have. One man does not silence a prepared emplacement in under 2 minutes and then appear on the opposite face of a hill he never crossed. So Reinecke did the correct, disciplined, doctrinally sound thing. He assumed a coordinated infiltration by at least a reinforced squad, and he redistributed his riflemen to cover 4 approaches instead of 1. Which is precisely how 131 men begin to become 9 separate groups of 14. 740. The water. Beac had not crossed the Crown. He had gone under the shoulder of it. Every fortified position on limestone has to deal with water, because limestone does nothing but move water, and the Tot engineers who built Hill 624 had cut a channel, a lined culvert, 60 by 70 centimeters, running from the Crown's catchment down and around the eastern shoulder to a spring outlet below the wire. It was not a secret. It was on their own drawings. It simply had not occurred to anyone that it was a door, because you would have to be willing to go into it on your belly in the dark, with your rifle pushed ahead of you, not knowing what was at the far end, for 110 meters. Leo Beac had been going into holes like that since he was 17. He went in at 7:14 and came out inside the wire at 7:40, and he cost himself the skin off both elbows and most of the use of his left arm to do it. 7:55. The cistern. The culvert did not run straight to the outlet. It fed a chamber first, a cut stone cistern under the eastern shoulder, 4 meters by 5, the original catchment for the farm that had stood on the Crown for 200 years before the Wehrmacht requisitioned it. There were 4 people in it. A Santa Ferry, 58, whose family had worked that ground since before there was an Italy. Her son-in-law Domenico, who had a shattered femur 3 weeks old and no splint worth the name. A boy of about 14, whose name nobody in the after-action ever recorded. And a girl of 9 named Chiara, sitting against the wall with a tin of chestnut flour held against her chest with both arms. The way a child holds the last thing she has been told is important. They had been down there since the 3rd of September. Beac came out of the culvert mouth into that chamber with a phosphorus burn on his forearm and a rifle in his hands, and the 4 of them looked at him, and he understood in about 2 seconds that everything had just changed. Because he could not leave them there. And he could not move them out. Domenico could not walk. The outlet led into open ground under observation, and the only route that was not covered by German guns was the one he had just crawled through, which a 9-year-old and a man with a broken femur could not manage. And at 1600 hours, 432 rounds of American 105 high explosive were going to arrive on top of them, which meant the position could no longer simply be taken. It had to be taken cleanly, emplacement by emplacement, from the inside out, without bringing a fight down into the eastern shoulder where the chamber was. It had to be taken quietly and slowly, and in the exact reverse of the order that made tactical sense, and every extra minute it cost him was a minute against a clock that could not be argued with. He took Chiara's tin of flour, put it back into her arms, and said the only Italian he had. "Zitta, torno, quiet, I come back." Then he went up into the covered trench with 6 clips and 3 grenades and started killing paratroopers in the dark. By 12:10 he had stopped. He was in a rifle sanger on the eastern lip with 2 dead Germans in it and his back against the stone, and his body had simply declined to go any further. No sleep since the 12th. No water since 900. The canteen was dry and had been for 3 hours. His left arm below the elbow had gone a color that was not a color skin makes. The 2 ribs had turned every breath into a decision. He had been on that hill for 7 hours and 40 minutes. He talked in that sanger. He knew he was talking. He was answering Kessler, who had been dead since 4:51 on the western terraces, about whether the ammunition had come up. He told Vital twice that the ground was wrong. He asked Aguilar something and then could not remember what. 3 hours and 50 minutes until the shells. And sitting there, he did the arithmetic that every man in that situation eventually does. Leggett's order had been lawful. It had been correct. Withdrawing at 5:47 had been the sane thing, the doctrinal thing, the thing that no board of officers anywhere would ever have questioned. He could have been off this hill by 700. He could be drinking water right now. He thought about the 4 people in the cistern, and about the fact that if he had followed that order at 5:47, they would still be exactly where they were, and at 1600 hours they would simply have stopped existing, and no American would ever have known they had been there at all. Then he put his hand into his left breast pocket, the way a man checks a pocket without deciding to, and found the oilcloth square. He did not unfold it. He did not need to. He knew the 4 lines. "Leo, one of you comes home." Stanley had been missing in the Vosges for 57 days. He sat with that. Nobody watched him sit with it. There is no citation language for what happens in a man in that particular minute, and there never will be. At 12:14 he checked the Garand. counted what he had: 3 clips, 24 rounds, 1 grenade, the pistol, and stood up. 3 hours and 46 minutes. 9 emplacements down to 4. By 1300, the defense of Hill 624 had stopped being a defense. Hauptmann Reith had lost communication with 3 of his 4 sectors. He had ordered the counterpenetration reserve committed at 11:05 and had not seen 11 of those men since. His Crest guns were firing on their own initiative at movement that was not there. One of them burned out a barrel at 12:40, engaging a stand of scrub at 40 meters. Men were leaving prepared positions, not running, worse than running, moving in 2s and 3s toward other positions, looking for other men, because the thing that had gotten into that hill could not be located and could not be counted and could not be shot at, and no soldier can hold a hole he believes he is alone in. Reinecke, on the Crown, heard a Jeffrater 20 meters away calling a name over and over into a covered trench that had 11 men in it that morning. He listened to that voice go from a command to a shout to something else. They were professionals, Crete, Casino, 4 years, and they were coming apart not because they were weak, but because they were being taken apart by something their training had no answer for and no name for. And here is the answer to what he did on that lower terrace at 6:44, when he lay in the open under a machine gun and pressed his ear to the ground for 40 seconds. He was counting boots. The covered trench on Hill 624 was floored with duckboard over cut rock. Every man moving through it transmitted. In 40 seconds, flat against the limestone, Leo Beac counted the intervals of movement through that trench and read the position the way he had read a long wall face at 900 feet. How many crews, how far, which direction, which lateral? He came off that terrace knowing roughly how many men were on the hill, and far more importantly, knowing when the northern lateral was empty, because the traffic through it ran in a 4-minute cycle and it had a gap in it. Everything after 6:51 went through that gap. He did it again at 13:10, 20 meters from the command bunker. Ear down, 20 seconds this time. The cycle had collapsed to nothing. There was no traffic in the lateral at all. There was nobody left to move. He came up the last stretch at 13:22. He moved, fired, dropped, moved again, 30 meters, 20, 10. The Panzerschreck team on the farm track never turned around. The number 2 gun crew got the barrel 11 degrees before the grenade came in over the parapet. Reinecke, Crete, Casino, 4 years, 41 years old, stood up out of a stone sanger at 4 meters with an MP40 in his hands and did not get the safety off. And Leo Beac shot him twice and went past him without stopping. The last emplacement on Hill 624 fell at 13:41. The last defender was a Jeffrater of 19 in the western Tobruk, who had a functioning MG42, 800 linked rounds, and a perfect field of fire, and who came out of that hole with empty hands and did not stop putting them higher. 19 minutes before the guns. Beac got him down into the cistern chamber, went in after him, brought Assunta and Chiara and the boy out through the culvert one at a time on their bellies, went back a 4th time for Domnico and dragged him 110 meters through 60 centimeters of stone channel by the collar of his jacket. They came out below the wire at 15:54. At 1600 hours, 432 rounds of American 105 high explosive landed on Hill 624, exactly as scheduled, because the order to cancel could not be given by a man whose radio was switched off. And then, after 9 days and 206 Americans, there was one sentence worth of silence on that mountain. Company B came back up on the morning of the 15th expecting to fight for the hill. What they found on it was this: 9 emplacements, all of them silenced. 2 tot bunkers entered through their own crawlways. A machine gun position with a hole cut through its roof from the back corner. An entrenching tool left in the dirt beside it. 63 German dead on the position and in the covered trench, counted against the ration returns found in the command bunker. 11 prisoners. An M1 Garand with a cracked stock, propped against a stone sanger, with nothing left in the belt to feed it. And a corporal sitting on a terrace wall below the wire with 4 Italian civilians, drinking out of somebody else's canteen, who did not stand up when the captain arrived because he could not. The prisoners went back to a cage outside Livorno. The confusion. On the 22nd of September, an interrogator with the 85th Division's IPW team asked a Fallschirmjäger Oberjefreiter to estimate the strength of the American force that had taken Hill 624. The man gave a figure of between 40 and 60 men, with engineer support, attacking on 3 axes. When he was told that the position had been taken by 1 rifleman, he did not argue. He asked the interrogator to repeat it. Then he asked to see him. The fear. 3 of the 11 described the same thing in separate interviews, and none of them used the word shooting. They described the sound: firing from inside the hill, firing from behind positions that had nothing behind them. One of them said that by the middle of the day nobody would go into the covered trench alone, and that men had begun tying themselves in pairs at the wrist to move through it. A detail no American had any reason to invent and no German any reason to admit. The name. They had a word for him by 1100 that morning, and they had it because of the culvert and the roof and the ear against the rock, because he had not come over the hill and he had not come around it. Der Bergmann, the miner. Not a boast. Not a monster. A trade. It is the most German thing in this entire account that a professional army being destroyed by 1 man reached for a job description, because that was the only category they had that fit. The praise. The last of the 11 to be interviewed was a Feldwebel who had commanded the Eastern Sangers and had watched the covered trench empty out over 7 hours. He was asked, finally, what he made of the American. He was quiet long enough that the interpreter asked the question a second time. Then he said that he had held ground at Cassino for 4 months against men he respected, and that he had never once, in all of it, been frightened of a man rather than of an army, and that whoever the American was, someone at Livorno should write his name down, because in 30 years the only thing anybody from that hill was going to remember was that they had all been on it together and he had been on it alone. And Assunta Ferry, who spoke to a civil affairs officer on the 16th of September through an interpreter, said something shorter. She said the soldier came out of the water channel like something the mountain had sent, and that he did not take the tin of flour from her granddaughter. He gave it back, and then he went upstairs and did the rest of it. She said she had watched Germans hold that hill for a year and Americans die on it for 9 days, and she had prayed the entire time for someone to come. She said, "Non ho pregato per un esercito." I did not pray for an army. The recommendation went forward on the 3rd of October, 1944, and it went forward with a problem attached to it. Corporal Leo Beac had been given a lawful order to break contact at 5:47 hours on the 14th of September and had not obeyed it. He had switched off his radio. Any honest account of what he did on Hill 624 had to begin by saying so, and Captain Howard Leggett's endorsement said so in the second paragraph, in one sentence, and then spent the rest of 2 pages on the culvert, the cistern, and the 4 civilians. There was no court-martial. There was no formal reprimand entered. There was, in the way of armies, a great deal of nothing. And then, on the 11th of March, 1945, the award of the Distinguished Service Cross, whose citation runs 410 words and manages never once to mention that the man was disobeying an order for every single one of the 8 hours it describes. The citation ends. Corporal Beac's extraordinary heroism and utter disregard for personal safety, sustained alone over a period of 8 hours against a numerically superior and heavily fortified enemy, reflect the highest traditions of the military service. Sustained alone. 2 words doing an enormous amount of work. Hill 624 fell on the 14th. The Il Giogo Pass was in American hands by the 18th. The Eastern Shoulders Fire Plan, the guns that had killed 206 men in 9 days, never fired on the 335th Infantry when it came through the pass below, because there was nothing left on the shoulder to fire them. What that was worth in American lives is not a number anyone can honestly give you, and this script will not invent one. Stanley Beac was confirmed killed in action in the Vosges. The telegram reached Shenandoah in November 1944. Leo was in a replacement depot outside Florence when he was told, and the man who told him said afterward that he did not say anything at all, and that the not saying anything went on for a very long time. He came home in October 1945. He went back underground in the spring of 1946 at the Maple Hill Colliery and cut anthracite for another 26 years. He married Helen Novick in 1948, 3 children. He did not join the VFW post. He did not go to the reunions. When his son found the Distinguished Service Cross in a cigar box in 1961 and asked him what it was for, Leo Beac said, "Italy," and closed the box, and that was the whole of it. He never learned what the Germans had called him. Nobody ever told him. The IPW transcript sat in a records center in Maryland for 51 years. He was sent up a mountain on intelligence that was wrong in every particular. His orders changed while he was inside the wire, and the men who changed them were right too. A gun that had been kept silent for 3 months opened on him at 8 meters, and he lived because he knew which way the ground was. He found 4 people in a stone room under an enemy command post and made every remaining decision of that day harder in order to keep them breathing. And an army that had held Crete and Cassino, that had never lost that hill, that had done absolutely everything correctly, sat in a wire cage 6 weeks later and gave him a name. Not because they had to, because they had no other word for what had gotten into their hill. If you have been on ground like that, you already know the part this script cannot write. It is not the assault. It is the Sanger at 12:10, with the canteen dry and dead men answering you, and the arithmetic that says the same thing was available 8 hours ago and you did not take it. That minute is the whole war. Everything else is just movement. And if you have not, then understand that there was nothing extraordinary about Leo Beac on the 13th of September. He was 5'7". He had a flattened nose and a coal scar on his forearm, and a letter in his pocket he had not answered. He was made extraordinary by circumstance. On ground he did not choose. And then he went home and cut coal for 26 years and never mentioned it. He was buried at Annunciation Cemetery in Shenandoah in 1979 after a heart attack at 59. The obituary in the Evening Herald ran 11 lines. It said he was a miner, a veteran of the Italian campaign, and a good father. It did not say Hill 624. It did not say 63. It did not say Bergman. The letter was in the cigar box with the medal. His mother's 4 lines folded into a square, worn soft along the creases from being carried and opened and carried again. Leo, one of you comes home. He kept it. He never once forgave himself for which one. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you never miss these forgotten stories of extraordinary American courage. Who should we tell next? Drop their name in the comments.